We were ending with the healing of the lame man here in Lystra. We called your attention to the parallels of Peter's healing of the lame man in Acts chapter 3 with this healing here that takes place. Both of them were men who have been congenitally lame, never walked. But there were some differences. Seems like Peter and John healed him as they were going in to the temple, that they were instructed to heal him, and that created an atmosphere and an opportunity to teach. This healing takes place in the context of Paul teaching. And this man's listening to him and has faith to be healed as a result of what Paul was saying and was healed. But I just want to give you the notable differences, I think, between chapter 3 and this account. Chapter 3, obviously, the man was a Jew. I think the man here in chapter 14 is pagan. He's a Gentile. He in 14 the one in chapter 3 showed no faith to be healed. In fact, it looks like they picked him up. This man just bubbled up when he was told to do that. He rose up and had the faith to be healed. And we're about to see another difference in the next question. I just want to call your attention to the fact that after this healing here, this man's not mentioned again in this story. He doesn't come into the story of the work that's going on here in Lystra. So question 6, what did the people say when they saw this miracle? Okay, so when they witnessed this man who had been lame all of his life and now healed and walking, they cried out in what language? Lycaonian language. The gods have come down to us in human form. And literally the word is, for cried out, they lifted up their voices. And so you just have to hear shouting going on and the announcement of this. And that pretty much answers this question. And so I want to move on to question 7. I know your propensity to start answering questions that we haven't reached yet. So I'm going to go on to question 7. Give both Greek and Roman names of the gods in verse 12 and tell why they might have given these names to the apostles. So what are they called here? They're called Zeus and Hermes. Those are the Greek names. And remember, who was the cause of the Hellenization of the entirely known world? Alexander the Great. Spread the Greek culture and the Greek language, which was wonderful, because that allowed a common language in which to preach the gospel. And so the Latinization of the world, which is going to be brought about by Rome, hasn't happened totally yet. Now, I may have mentioned this, I meant to, that in Antioch of Pisidia, because it was a Roman city, counted as a Roman city, counted as if it was in Italy, the main language there was Latin that they spoke. So the Latinization hasn't happened yet. So what are the Roman mythological god equivalent names for Zeus and Hermes? Jupiter and Mercury. You've seen Mercury before. There he is. If you've ever bought flowers from FTD, that's them. There we go. Just wanted to make sure that you knew what you were looking at there. So why call them that? Go ahead, Megan.
Because Paul was called Hermes or Mercury because he was the one who spoke.
Okay.
And was speaking to all the people, but then Barnabas was the person who came with him, so he seems like Paul was the spokesperson for Barnabas. Hermes was the messenger, the spokesperson for
Okay. So Mercury or Hermes was the spokesperson or the messenger of the gods in Greek and Roman mythology. And Jupiter and Zeus are the kings, the king of the gods, okay? And there's no reason given for calling Barnabas Zeus here. Some said, well, perhaps he's older, perhaps he has more of a personal bearing than Paul. Remember, I think we have mentioned this in our Corinthians class, in 2 Corinthians, the 2nd chapter, and verse 10, Paul said, nope, I think I put 2 Corinthians 2:10, I meant 1 Corinthians 2:10, where Paul says that, nope, that's not right either. I made a mistake in my reference, but what Paul said is, I came in weakness. His bearing is not powerful. That was one of the things that they were saying about him, that he is not overpowering. So now let's keep going here, because I think I have some very interesting information for you on question 8. What were the people about to do? In what way? They were about to offer sacrifice. Yeah, the priest of Zeus went to the temple, which was outside the city, so it's just on the outskirts of the city there, and brought back bowls and wreaths to the city gates. And he and the people, as you just said, wanted to offer sacrifices to them. Have you ever stopped to think about the time frame of elapsed time from the time that they start shouting this and then this happens? I often think when Abraham, for instance, saw the 3 visitors and he said, take a seat, let me fix you something. And what does he do? He goes and kills the calf and dresses it and cooks it and has Sarah put some leavening and bake it. How long does that take? It takes hours. It's not like, welcome to McDonald's, I'll have your hamburger and fries in just a moment. I mean, we're talking hours for him to say, please wait for this. And listen, that tells me a lot about the time element that people were free with and were willing to wait. And I think that probably in this, there's a lot of confusion going on here. And the fact that they're speaking out in the Lycaonian language, and we talked a little bit about this last week, that just because Paul and Barnabas could speak, if they were needing to preach the gospel, they could preach the gospel in Lycaonian because they had the gift of tongues. And perhaps even in the process of doing that, if they're conversing with someone, they might have been able to understand what questions they were asking in Lycaonian and being able to interpret that tongue. But I don't think that they were just linguists and they knew every language and could hear every language and understand every language when it was spoken. And so they're shouting this. There's this confusion that is going on here. And I just don't think that Paul and Barnabas understand what's going on here in all of this confusion. And so how long does it take to make garlands? It's not like they have a garland room, where they have these ready just in case we need it. And so they had to go back and get the bulls to bring them to sacrifice. They had to make the garlands. And again, this could be an hour or two, or half a day. I have no idea how long it takes. But when the priest gets back and he's got the garlands probably around the bull's neck, and they're getting ready to offer sacrifices to them, that all of a sudden they realize what's about to happen because of the actions. So I need you to picture a highly superstitious and fanatical crowd at this point before Paul and Barnabas, before we get to question 9. Okay, I know that's going to happen. I don't want you to get there yet. So, Tim?
What struck me in all this was, I guess, thinking back to our Revelation class and how Jesus is fighting the battle and everything. And I thought, man, this is quite the miracle for them, because it's attacking at this superstition and
Right.
everything like that. And just amazed at that God can do this and put Jesus in the forefront this way.
Right.
But of course, the devil, he's going to be pretty mad at that, and you see how much
Right.
he pushes back.
Right.
This is a big battle.
It is.
here.
And in fact, who is the devil getting them to get the credit for healing this lame man? Hermes and Zeus. And so, like you said, switching the focus. I mean, is there anybody here that doesn't believe a miracle took place? They all know a miracle took place. They're all astounded by that. So, what I hadn't realized before is that a Greek author named Ovid, O-V-I-D, wrote a narrative poem in 8 AD. So we're about 50 years prior to this. And he wrote a poem about this region that we're in. Let me see. Let me just go to my map. I've got a map here. That's not the one I want. There. In this area of Galatia. And this is what the story is that he wrote. And this, again, is 50 years ago. He tells of an ancient legend with a local background, so in this area, when Jupiter and his son Mercury visited the hill country of Phrygia. They were disguised as mortal men. In their incognito, they sought hospitality, but were rebuffed 1,000 times. At last, they were given lodging in a tiny cottage thatched with straw and reeds from the marsh by an elderly couple named Philemon and Baucis, who entertained them out of their poverty. Later, they were rewarded, and the rest of the homes who had refused them were destroyed with a flood. So everybody else in this, and all of these homes that had rejected Jupiter and Mercury were all destroyed, according to this poem. And this couple were rewarded just outlandishly as you read the whole story. It is very reasonable that these Lycaonians know that story, that they know about this poem, because it happened in their neighborhood, according to Ovid. And that if, again, these gods came down in human form, as supposedly they did 50 years ago, they did not want to suffer the same fate that the people did 50 years ago in not honoring them, not worshiping them. And so they're very anxious here to treat them with honor. They're giving Paul and Barnabas, announcing that they are the Zeus and the Mercury of that story, and now trying to sacrifice to them. And give them, obviously, the honor they believed they deserved. Also, there are 2 inscriptions and a stone altar have been discovered near Lystra, which indicates that Zeus and Hermes were worshipped together as local patron deities. So that's the background that I didn't know. I mean, why would you just pick Zeus and Mercury out of the hat like that? Well, that's why. It's because that's part of the history, the mythological history, at least from them, but what had been written about that region as having happened half century before this. You don't seem half as excited about it as I was. So now that's okay, you know. Yes. I just wanted you to kind of effervescent just rise up and say, wow! No.
I just wonder how that plays in then to God's providence as far as sort of using this, and then, like you said, they can't deny that the miracle happened, and so with all the opposition, they do kind of fade out.
Right.
But still, that miracle still happened and gives them pause.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've always wondered why. Why did you choose those 2 Greek gods out of the hat? And now that explains it for me. there any other comments on that? Anybody want to do backflips or anything before we move on to question 9? All right, so how did Paul and Barnabas stop them? Okay.
They had to get animated
Yes.
to draw attention away from what was about to happen and to get so that they could tell him what he's going to tell them.
Right.
Which is turn from these empty
Right.
things of worship
Right.
and turn to the living God. So they had to draw their attention away from all the garlands and all the
Yes.
pomp and
Yeah.
all of this about the
Yeah, it's going to have to be an equal and opposite reaction that they're having. By the way, I think I told you when we were in chapter 13 that you'll never read Barnabas and Paul again. It's always Paul and Barnabas. And right here in the next chapter, it says in verse 14, but the apostles Barnabas and Paul. But the reason for that is because it's Zeus and Hermes. And so Luke is just giving it back to us in the order of the way that the Lycaonians here are referring to it. And so in order to stop this, because of what's going on there in verse 12, they tore their clothes. Anybody want to describe for me what that means or how it's done? Okay. When you tore your clothes, it wasn't your outer garment that you tore. Outer garments were heavy fabric. It was the inner. So if you have a robe on that's open like this, or even if it was tied, you took that inner undergarment, and that's what you tore. And it's not like you tore it to bits. You tore 4 or 5 inches of it. And part of it is because so you can repair that real easily. I mean, they can't just go down to Walmart and buy new clothes, okay? So what they tear is going to have to be repaired. And it symbolizes a lot of things. It symbolizes grief. It symbolizes pain on hearing something, of seeing anything that's heartbreaking. There's a lot of things that are expresses horror. And I think that's what this is, that what they're about to commit is sacrilege to Paul and Barnabas, and they're trying to get them to stop. And it was a recognized, I mean, if you're tearing your clothes, if you're tearing something as precious as your clothes, then this is really something. And not only did they tear their clothes, they rushed into the crowd. They are getting in between the priest and the people and the bulls here where this is about to occur, and they are shouting as they went. The Greek word here is krazo. I tell you, I share interesting Greek words with you. It's K-R-A-Z-O. And I love that because it kind of matches with our word crazy and gets along with what Randy said. It means to cry aloud and to shriek. And they're screaming at the top of their lungs, stop, stop, stop. Why are you doing this? And what were they insisting? We are human beings. We are a people of the same nature as you. Literally. And then they told them why they had come. Here's the reason we're here. We are bringing you good news. We're telling you to turn from these worthless things, the Zeus and the Hermes, the idols, to the living God who made heaven and earth and the sea and everything in them. It took it took an act of God almost for them to stop them from doing this. And probably one of the reasons they listened to them is because there was an act of God just before that in the healing of this lame man. They still had that respect. Kate?
Like they didn't really stop them completely. Like in verse 18, it says, even with these words, they had difficulty keeping the crowd from sacrificing
Right.
them.
Right.
Like they
Barely.
subdued it
Right.
a little bit.
Right. Yeah, they barely did it. And I would guess that among those who would have still wanted to, why would they have wanted to continue? Because they believed that they were Zeus and Hermes. And if they believe that they're Zeus and Hermes are telling you to stop, then that's the only thing that stopped them. So it's almost like their continued belief that they were who they thought they were kept them from doing the thing that Paul and Barnabas didn't want them to do.
It's amazing how big of an impact this healing of one man had on this whole town.
Right.
Because it wasn't just the woman at the well and she
Right.
went and told everybody, this man, prophet told me everything. I don't know if the whole town came to you,
But there was a bunch of people.
there was. But
Yeah.
this is like the whole town is in an uproar over this.
Right.
Because no doubt they knew his mother and they've known this child. He's
Right.
not been able to walk and now
Right.
he's leaping and walking
Right.
because of these two individuals.
Right. Right.
So it's just amazing how much of an uproar that there was.
Right. And remember what we talked about last week about William Ramsey and several others have depicted this area of the world as being illiterate, kind of a backwater, simple people, which is why superstitions would be so prevalent there, but also why they would be, you got to be impressed when you see something like this, because they're not sophisticated. Megan?
And even like the priests here were the ones who were instigating a lot of like the sacrifices and stuff, but you think about like the miracles that Jesus did, and the priests and the people who were at the temple who should have been realizing that this is Jesus and going and sacrificing to, or at least worshiping him in the appropriate way, did exactly the opposite.
Right. Right. Yeah. Tim?
How long did that guy in your timeline estimation thing say that they were at Lystra?
I got to go this way. They were at Lystra until from the summer of 48 till the fall of 48. So 6 months.
So, because verse 7 says they continued to preach the gospel.
Right.
But it seems like once this happened, it ended.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. Yeah. So let's go on to question 10 then. Give the basic outline of Paul's sermon. And listen, while I know that what we have, when Luke records this, we're just getting a rough abstract of his sermon. It's not like Luke was a stenographer that he's writing down everything. But there's a lot of importance to this particular lesson because of the audience that it's given to. Number one, mostly pagan. What other audience is mostly pagan in your recall of the book of Acts? We haven't got there yet. There's a big hint. Athens, in Acts the 17th chapter. But what's the difference between the populace of Athens and the populace of Lystra? Big difference in education. Athens, you have a highly sophisticated group of people, very well educated, here not. So that's what makes this important, is because
You don't read about them finding a group of Jews at the local synagogue.
right, that doesn't happen here. And it really invites comparison to Paul's address to the Jews in the only other recorded sermon in this journey, which was in Antioch of Pisidia. That was to Jewish people. This is to Gentile people. And it really shows, this lesson here, as little of it as we know, shows how flexible Paul was in presenting the gospel and being able to adapt it to the audience that he has before him. And we know that he does that. To the Jews, I became a Jew. To those without law, I came without law. I mean, he's able to imbibe and impersonate and become like the audience that he's teaching. And of course, from 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 2, his core message never changes, which is what? Jesus Christ, and him crucified. Okay, he's gonna get to that, very much so. If you look in chapter 13, for instance, in verse 26, brothers, Gentile children, this is in Antioch. I've come to give you the message of salvation. Here in chapter 14 and verse 3 in Iconium, they were speaking, confirmed the message of his grace. And here in chapter 14 and verse 15, we're bringing you the good news. So that's the core of his preaching. And so again, what's a very brief outline of this lesson?
Well,
Go ahead.
one is that this he's telling them that this is the God that made heaven and earth.
Okay.
And has done all these wonderful things for you.
Okay.
And he maps out the things that he has done to remind them of what he has done for them.
Right.
And so that's like a sermon.
Right. It is a sermon. Yeah. But first thing he says, turn from these worthless things to who? To the living God. Who is what? The Creator. And not only is he the Creator, he's been kind and patient with you, because what does he do? He brings all of these blessings to you. He's brought you, he made the earth and heaven and sea. In the past, he let all the nations go their own way. There's his patience. And yet he has not left himself without testimony. And what is his testimony? Yeah, his kindness toward them and providing them with the rain, the crops, food, filling your hearts with joy. He's painting a picture of the living God for them, as opposed to these worthless gods that you have. Yes, Ross.
And also, like, adding to the contrast, Greek/Roman mythology, there wasn't one God who made heaven and earth. Like,
No.
Zeus was over the heavens, and different ones were over the earth, and Neptune and Poseidon was over the seas. And,
Right.
Demeter was over the crops and
Right.
all these different
Right.
things. It's like, well, no, this is one person, one being.
Right. Right. And so there's all of this testimony about him. And listen, again, I know that Paul preached more than it. He said more than that, all that is here. And eventually, because I know who Paul is, he's going to bring in Jesus Christ and him crucified, which is the message of grace. And listen, the main lesson I think that we can learn from this and from Antioch of Pisidia and every other one is that when you begin to bring somebody to Christ, where do you have to start? Where they are. Right there. It's like, as I mentioned this morning with the Chinese people. What day is it? What's the date? From what? I didn't do it then, but I could do it and say, okay, so this Fitbit, just happened or designed? Designed. And then I take off my glasses and I say, my eye? Just happened or designed? Oh, just happened. This eye is a lot more complex than this Fitbit. And it just opens up the world to them because they've never considered it before. And so, whatever's going on here, it was enough. And listen, the credence and the truthfulness about what Paul and Barnabas are proclaiming about the living God and what he's done for them, the testimony of why that's true is standing right there in front of them. And he hasn't ever stood before. And that's that lame man. That's the evidence that what they're saying is true. And it was enough, and I agree with Kate, it barely was enough to prevent them from sacrificing to them as gods, but it was enough to get them to do that. And we don't know how long they were here. Now, this slide up here says that they were with them about 3 months. And they're going to be another 3 months in the next city that we're going to be going to in just a moment.
It takes a while for word to get back to
Right.
there.
Right.
So there's your time.
Right. There's the time there that's that. And you'll note here that it says, then some Jews came from Antioch, and exactly what Tim was pointing out. So that there's some time that's passed between this event and the disobedient Jews coming. And in fact, if you go down to verse 20, after, I hope I'm not spoiling this for you, after Paul was stoned, who does it say gathered around him? Disciples. So they had some success. They had made some disciples and some converts, and not just this weekend, not just this day. They've had time to bring people to Christ, and it's those people, however many there are there, that are now gathering around Paul after this stoning. I oftentimes we miss things like that. We miss that, and I think, at least, and this is me, I have them moving way too fast. I would have them a week and a half here in Lystra, and just a little bit of time in Derby, and then heading back. And there's got to be more time than that, because we know when they left and we know when they got back, and you got to fill that time with more than just travel. And even when they're traveling, they're preaching the gospel. Okay. Any other questions or comments on that? Yes, John.
This is a lot of topic from what we've been talking about, but I noticed here it says, but when the apostles, Barnabas and Paul,
Yes.
and it applies the term apostle to both of them.
Yeah. And were you not here last week, were you? Okay. And we spent an hour talking about that, John. No. No. Apostles is used in two senses. One of the 12, that were picked by Jesus and had that special office, and others were anybody that's sent. For instance, in the book of Hebrews, it talks about Jesus being an apostle. Well, he was sent by God. Epaphroditus was an apostle, or a messenger in most of our translations, but the same Greek word apostoli, which is he was a messenger for the church in Philippi. And Paul and Barnabas are messengers, and they've been sent from the church in Antioch and sent by the Holy Spirit on this journey. And so they fit that. So I'm glad you brought that up. Don't feel bad about that. There are other people in the room that weren't here last week, and really glad that you were willing to do that. So. Okay, so question 11 then. How far did the people from Antioch and Iconium come to persecute them? What? Well, if you want to put it in kilometers, they'll be fine, but I'll have to do the math somehow to figure that out. Yes, I'm talking miles.
That's 19 and 80.
19?
19 miles and 80 miles.
Okay. Antioch of Pisidia to Lystra is about 115 miles. And if you... Where's my map? So they're from here, coming down here, and then to here, and I probably took off the mileage thing there, but it's about 115 miles. From Iconium to Lystra is about 30 miles. 115 miles, traveling at 3 miles per hour, that's a pretty nice brisk walk, 3 miles an hour, is 38 hours of walking. And up over hills and back down again. But, how many of you would be willing to go 115 miles on foot to hear the gospel preached somewhere, let alone to go and try to stop somebody from preaching the gospel? What does that tell you about these people?
In 120 degrees temperature.
Yeah, well, I don't know what the there's been a little cooler there. Yes, Randy?
That's what Paul did.
Yeah, when he went up to,
Before he was converted.
right, when he went to
He
Damascus.
was going, I don't know, I remember how many miles it was.
Yeah,
Not limited in his meal to Jerusalem.
right. And it seems like to me that this instigation of this plot to do harm to Paul and Barnabas started in Antioch. They come to Iconium. Are they going to find willing workers there? Look at verse 5 of chapter 14. They were going to try to kill them there, going to stone them there. And so they got this new pack of guys in from Antioch and saying, we're going to go get Paul and Barnabas in Lystra. We want to stone them. We wanted to do that. We're right with you. And so they obviously would have joined in hands. And so it really tells you the extent of the hatred of Paul, the hatred of the preaching of Jesus. And in Antioch of Pisidia and in Iconium, what did Paul and Barnabas leave behind? Yeah, churches of disciples, of Christians. So they, and that would have also fueled their hatred. How dare you come in here and now look what you've left behind and all of that. So the intent was to lynch Paul and certainly also Barnabas as they're coming down here. All right, so let's see. Yes?
That seems to be a common approach to people who disagree with, or for the people who disagreed with the Jews.
Right.
I mean, they wanted to kill Lazarus after
Right.
Jesus raised
Right.
him. They killed Jesus.
Right. Well, let's reword that. It seems to be the typical modus operandi of who? Of the Jewish people towards those who are also Jews but preaching the gospel of Christ. Which is why, again, when I look at the book of Revelation, who is the main persecutors of the church? Who's the main persecutors of the church in the book of Acts? It's Jews. It's not the Romans.
Oftentimes the Romans are protecting Paul.
Yeah, they go in and rescue him and then take credit for it. Yeah, we'll see that as well.
They don't like to hear that.
Yeah. So, question 12, what shows the fickle nature of the Lysterians?
They're willing to kill their God.
Yeah. Well, and let's say that we're now after it's been like 3 months, and so here these Jews arrived. What does it say that they did? It's the first thing it says they did. They won over the crowd. They persuaded the crowd, and I don't know what means they had to do that. Did they? I mean, as you're looking at Paul's sermon and you're trying to stir up the crowd, they could have remember what he said about your honored gods? What did that Paul guy call them? Worthless things? He called them worthless things? Are you going to let that slide? He called them worthless things. And then they start trying to convince them that this Jesus person is a fraud. It never happened. I mean, there's all kinds of ways in which they could have gotten them all fired up. And if it's been 3 or 4, how long is generally our people's memories? Is short. Randy?
Just thinking about this miracle and the impact that it initially had, and then thinking about the conversation between Abraham and the rich man, and Abraham wanting Lazarus to go back from the dead because then they would, not come to this same place. But even real miracles, it didn't have a lasting impact.
Right.
It's just amazing.
Right. I've often, my example of that is the people inside Jericho when the Israelites are marching around it, and every day they march around it and they blow trumpets or actually they just go around quietly, don't they? And so the first day I can just see the walls just packed with people. What's going on here? About day 6, people say, hey, you want to go to the wall and watch the Israelites march? Nah, there's nothing happening. They're not interested in that anymore. And it's just after a while, what's fresh and curious just fades away. And I think that's probably part of what happened here too. But in whatever manner, they convinced them that Paul and Barnabas were a threat to their community. And as a threat to their community, they believed they needed to be taken out. And they believed what the Jews said, and they acted on it with the Jews here. Let's start question 13, because I'm going to I think next week, and I'll give you this question now. We're going to begin next week with the question, what do you think was Paul's condition when he was stoned? Okay, I don't want you to answer. I don't want you to pop out an answer now. I just want you to think about it. And from the standpoint of what the people who stoned him came to a conclusion of and what we read from that.
Hey, Dan, before you begin on that, just one other related thought is how quickly people who laid down palm fronds and
Oh, yeah?
and shouted Hosanna,
Right?
and a week later they were shouting
Yeah.
crucify him.
Yeah,
So
yeah. 5 days later, 6 days later. Yeah,
it's amazing.
right. So what happened to Paul in Lystra? That's what I want to cover. The second part of question 13, what is your opinion of Paul's condition? I don't want you to touch on that. I just want you to tell me what happened to Paul at Lystra.
That's where he was stoned.
Yes? Is that your answer? Or this isn't Jeopardy. You don't have to ask it in the form of a question.
That is my answer.
Okay. Okay. So somehow they got a hold of Paul, didn't they?
Yeah.
They grabbed him and got a hold of him and they stoned him. Now, I assume that they would have also liked to have done the same thing to Barnabas. I think that was the plan in Iconium. They were going to kill both of them there. But it doesn't seem that Barnabas was with them when this occurred. Why would you think that the Jews are behind all of this? What hint in this tells you the Jews are behind it?
Stoning.
Yeah, the stoning. Because that's their message. If it was left to the pagans, probably what would they have done? They just beat them to death. They would just take in sticks and stones and everything else and beat them to death. And this also corroborated, when Jews stone somebody, what do they do? What's the first thing they do? If they're going to stone somebody, what's the first thing they do? They take them outside the city. What's a good example of that? Stephen. What that tells me, and I'm going to stop right there. What that tells me is that the Jews have lost control of their pagan followers, because where are they going to stone Paul? Right there, right where they found him. Okay, and so I'll just pretend like we haven't even started question 13 next week, but I do want you to be thinking about how Paul was. All right, so I'm going to let the little ones come in, and then somebody else can do a closing prayer afterwards.
We're doing it out there.
Oh, you're doing it in the foyer? Well, then let's have a quick prayer before we go out there. Our Father in heaven, thank you so much for your word. Thank you for exercising our minds, giving us minds to think and to look at things in ways perhaps that we haven't before. Help us always, Father, to have a holy curiosity about what you reveal to us, because we will never plumb its depths. Continue to encourage us as we learn and as we grow and as we are edified in the study of your word. And be with us now is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.